Moving on with this series, America's favorite modeler here, Master Xeon, with part 5 of the Boltzn3ch modeling tutorial series. So let's go ahead and just jump in this. So continuing where we left off, still just doing some modeling, filling some shapes here, messing with the hoses. And so I set the object to be a hook, so that way whenever I move it to orient it, I don't have to worry about realigning the hoses individually. And I believe I'm almost done with the modeling here, and then I get to the more exciting part, the UV unwrapping and texturing. But first I need to turn this into some quads, or else it's going to unwrap like a nightmare. So using a knife tool, just cut across. So a couple edge loops tighten the form up a little bit. So ingons are something I feel I must avoid at all costs, at least in a final render. For one thing, ingons don't translate very well to other packages. Usually it turns them into really horrible triangles or just removes the faces altogether. So it's good to remove them. And when it comes to the UV unwrapping part, you'll see using Smart Project, can't figure out an ingon worth the hell. So it's definitely imperative that we remove them at all costs. And with as much geometry as we're just fooling around with, jumping from thing to thing, it's kind of easy to create doubles and cut things and forget to ensure that there wasn't a double created, because it's for some reason creates doubles almost more often than it cuts sometimes whenever I'm using Blender. So I upped the resolution on the hoses to make them look as nice as possible, and then with them at the maximum they could possibly look, I converted to a mesh because I can't do anything about the spans that are along the sides. I cut it up and down just once so it unwraps nicely, and then I use the Decimate. One of the things I noticed with the Decimate is in wire view, every even number iteration cut it into quads and every odd number cut it into triangles. So the ends was something that I pondered for a bit and was wondering why it decimated them to look like that when everything else worked out so well. So what I ended up doing is selecting all those triangular faces and then try to find a option to convert them to quads. I thought there was one. Maybe, there's a lot of options there. I don't even use those. And so we'll just piece separate them, and I'll just use snapping and extrude quad faces to fit. No biggie. My nigga. Oh, sorry. I'm also listening to music at the same time while I'm watching this, but yeah, this has actually been a pretty long series, so I'm eager to get this done and move on to the other thing. And there we go. Nice even amount of divisions. I could go ahead and delete those hoses, and I have these to mess with now. And I will decimate them as well. There we go. Now I got some simplified circular geometry that's more manageable. And so that's the workaround that I've come up with for dealing with the curve tools and the unneeded amount of geometry creates sometimes whenever you convert it to a mesh. So no matter what, I end up in the end still having to correct quads at the top of the whole ordeal. It never occurred to me to try using remesh on it since it manages to convert everything to quads, but I'm pretty sure it wouldn't be the quads that I wanted. But the workaround, as you can see, is pretty easy of just snapping an extrusion up. So I'm just putting seams in areas that I know I want to be flat, like the faces at the bottom and along the side, so that way they unwrap evenly for the cavity maps that will be going inside of them. The bolts get lost at some point, and I haven't re-added them at this point, but I may, just as a final touch, I may also just add bolts random places just using normal maps, since that would definitely add a lot to it. So here comes the unwrapping. So we unwrap it, I just take a look at what we're dealing with. And it looks good except for that one area where everything's bunched up. And if I go into edit mode, I can find out and isolate it by using Shift A to hide everything else than what I have selected. And I just delete the faces because I'm pretty sure that it's looking like that because I created Ngons right there, see? So that's the reason that my UVs have a bunch of sphincters in them. And so I have to place cuts in every loop. So for UV unwrapping, most of the time, if I'm testing something, I'll just use a 1024 by 1024 UV. But if it's for something that I plan to reuse later, or something that I want to render and that I care about, I'll use a 2048 by 2048. But 4096 is kind of overkill. Like that's probably if it's a gig that someone's paying for or something, then I'd use maps that high. Or if it's required just by the model and the levels of detail, then that level's necessary. But usually 4096 gets the job done. And for something like this that's going to have a bunch of small parts distributed over the map, each area is not going to get a whole lot of room. So it's up to us to separate it accordingly and give the larger islands to prominent geometrical features. You wouldn't want the back faces that are all occluded to be taking up the biggest parts because they're just going to be black and never seen. So I'm just unwrapping and inspecting each part one by one. So pinning is on from the first time that I was dealing with this wing. I see that there's faces up there. I forgot. There we go. I got them. Same technique of layering in cuts. And of course I need to put seams here or else the ones going down the middle won't work or they don't serve a purpose. Now we're cooking. And for this, I could be anal about it and try to get these in the most rectangular, most useful shapes that are just, mainly square shaped, fitting in a UV image editor. But, that is a lot of work to actually put into this. And the Smart Project options, if you use them intelligently with the seams, can get you some pretty decent results as far as to just UV and get it out of the way, because it is just one of the many stages of, making something. You got to go model it, then rig it, then animate it, then composite it, and then do the final cut of it. And, by the time you don't want to be tied down by any one thing. So it's good that it's important that you're able to jump through the whole process of production as quick as possible. As you see, for the most part, everything was pretty fairly unwrapped the first time, but I do see in this area that there's some geometry craziness that has to be dealt with, where I think things were doubling up on the mirror from the multiple orientations and reapplication of its rotations that just may have caused this thing to lose a little bit of its integrity. But we go ahead and just correct that, put some loop cuts, begin merging them. Voila, everything's all better. I hate that I pinned everything. Now this particular piece, I unwrapped it and then I looked at it and I think I accepted it and I think I accepted it again, but I was wondering why these verts were just sticking out just a second ago. And so I'm still looking at the UV wondering if that's truly acceptable, and the answer is not. If in case you didn't notice, they were overlapping in the middle, so that is a problem. But I didn't notice it at this moment. I'm blinded by blind goal, by blind rushing to just be done with this process altogether and get to the next stage of this. So I take a break to do something, I guess. And back to work. So look at that UV, it looks acceptable. Look at this UV, it looks completely unacceptable. So putting the seams there may not have been the smartest choice, but I'm pretty sure that I stick with it. And I just continue trying to work my way around. And these two pieces are looking good, so we'll go ahead and hide those. These two pieces are looking good, go ahead and hide those. Those two pieces, now these angel wings and the UV image area, these need to be adjusted. And part of the reason is because the seam's not continuous, so we'll fix that real quick, unwrap it. That pretty much resolved that whole thing. So now it's these things. So we'll just hide a set of stuff and just work with that for a while. And so we'll go ahead and select these little pieces, knickknacks, and unwrap those. Those UVs will do. However, I'm curious why there's not any loop cuts on the other side anymore to keep it even. Then I realized that cutting it like that didn't even go all the way through it. So instead of adding a loop, I will just remove a loop, and that one just will not go. So I'll just delete it and put another one in its place because that's just easier. We'll put a cut there, unwrap them. That's a much better UV unwrap. And so now we're seeing how the UVs look on it after going into texture mode with Alt-C. And just cut this up in a way that gives me some pretty decent layouts. And the UVs are a mess. Use Control A and Control P to make them the appropriate size and to pack them all in the view mode. One of the most useful UV editor shortcuts that I know, or two of them, Control A and Control P, couldn't live without them. Honestly, I would be infuriated to have to manage those myself every time. It'd make me afraid to UV map. So now I'm just adding in some loop cuts to try to stiffen the form up. I see a little bit of stretching near the seams, and that's not good. But I guess it's really not that much of a problem since the texture dot bake to it would bake with the subdivision active, but it's still not something I even like to see in the viewport. So now we'll bake the cavities. After duplicating the object, hiding the original, going into texture paint mode, dirtying the UVs. Now the more vertices that you have, the finer your dirt map cavity mask will look, but keep in mind that of course I go into the node editor with a color ramp and I just offset the midtones, highlights, and darks that are in this image. So all I want is just a graduation between seams and the basic front facing areas from the recess. Now personally I actually look at the cavity bake-in like making an ambient occlusion pass, except the lighting scheme is environmental instead of just using the lighting information that's in the scene. So it's a big thanks to Ben Simmons who showed it in his elf texturing tutorial he did on Blender Cookie way back when that I always was a big fan of. So I'm guessing these vertices were hidden during the assignment or the unwrapping, so I'll just unwrap them and place them in myself. And then I'll go into paint mode later and just paint the UV. And I'm just going to paint it white. White will just take care of the problem altogether. So for the rest of the wing, I pretty much stick with the same workflow as I used on the body. I'm just using the shaders and baking them in after assigning them to random faces, and then going and just modifying those UVs after saving them out. So I kind of like the finish on the wings right there, just making that part red. I thought that would look cool. So I'm just going for just a random look here. Nothing in particular in mind, just wanting to get the texture out of the way. So in GIMP, I go into the options and go ahead and offset it by the power of 2 so I can use a clone brush and fix the seams and make a seamless texture. That way I'm able to spam it more readily without having to worry about seams being visible during the rendering. I think I lost a lot of the information that the map had that I actually found interesting in it that made me even want it in the first place, and it starts to look kind of cloned. So here's me desperately trying to make it look unique. However, the tonal ranges are starting to get a little off, and there's white splotches because the values I'm using are just off. But it gets the job done for what it's supposed to be, which is just a dirty spot map. I mean, realistically, its purpose is to be clamped and then multiplied against the cavity map to get the areas where the paint would be pilling. So I tried putting an HDRI on it to give it the look of chrome. Um, I thought it was a good idea at the moment to apply it to reflection and then see how it bake out. It actually was not as good an idea, or at least it didn't match up to how I was wanting it to look in the end as I was imagining it when it was rendering. So I ended up just scrapping that idea and even scrapping a texture that I applied to it. I don't want any complexity like that in my color map. I want this one to just be just pure colors. And so before I go ahead and save it, I'll try changing up some colors, get it to look like something more competent, and then bake it out. So now I'm setting it up for the rendering stage. Just set up a little window so that way it'll be easy to deal with. and lower the amount of threads it uses to one, so that way it can continue doing stuff in the background while allowing me to responsively deal with these nodes in the foreground. Because with all the threads taken up on my i5, it just is done. So first I use an emission to just view what the textures I'm dealing with look like. Start tweaking the cavity, begin getting some pretty nice values here. And I decide I want to make multiple iterations of this, so that way I can use it in different areas. So first I mix two separate colors, see how that looks, and then that way I can more readily see what values I'm messing with. So then I get serious, I start adding in the textures that I plan to use for the final. And just more tweaking. This is just node compositing to just try to get more interesting values in my color map. Anytime you start plugging up the glossy, you start getting a pretty nice looking render happening. However, it's not entirely the look that I'm going for, so more tweaking is required here. In fact, it's just a simple texture. There's no difference in the materials yet as far as which is which. So working my way in there to figure out where to put the splash paint at. And here we go. So we'll look around and know that we lost our wing piece there because I messed up on unifying it and rotating it. But I can't lose this piece. That one's important. Same with these hoses. I spent a long time getting these hoses to go the way I want to, so they got to fit in there too. But I don't know why I scaled it. Reset that scale and just plugged them back up. I don't know why I keep scaling. So just move it around. Get this thing fit back up proper. Now for these two items, I'm going to need to give them a shader, but I call them temp parts because it's like these damn parts I forgot. I should have unified it and put them part of the main texture map, but I didn't. So I just import the gray from the shader pack y'all saw me using earlier in the video, because it's just a damn good paint shader to have for this particular part, I thought. And same with the hoses. In fact, I create this texture and end up using it in the main render on the remaining parts that are lacking textures, just because it just fit the whole color scheme of it. And I could be UV unwrapping and personally painting everything, but to tell the story, I think I've already got the job done with the amount of texturing that's done at this level. um, I mean, there's still a couple of things I gotta do to complete this scene and finish this tutorial, but for the most part, you get the point. Of course, clamp it till it's hard black and hard white. There's no in-between grays when it comes to splotching paint on stuff. And so for these videos, y'all have seen me use a lot of the same techniques over and over to put this model together, so I hope I haven't bored y'all too bad. If I sound repetitive, that is my teaching style, to quote a great teacher on YouTube who I remember saying that in another video, it just cracked me up. But, it's the same techniques, different models, fine-tuning the workflows to try to figure out the easiest way to get this put together without pulling your hair out, wasting too much time, or ending up with something that's just blocky and simplified looking. It doesn't, convey the form. So we let this baby render out, admiring it, while we sit back, smoke cigars, and feel proud of ourselves. And that does it. So I'll see y'all in part 5, where we'll start getting all these pieces back into the main scene. And happy blendering.